we've gotten to the place where we're treating our leadership like the only important asset of the company, and everybody else is a liability. And that is just a fundamental flaw. So that's what's driven all of our culture challenges to date. People aren't machines. You can't pull out one machine, stick in a new machine, and have zero effect on your productivity. You take out one human and stick in another human, you have an effect. Not only because the new asset isn't as trained, they don't know, but to everybody else. So all of those ripple effects and all those ramifications, they don't go into anybody's balance sheet.
You're listening to Brainwork Framework, a business and marketing podcast brought to you by focus-biz.com.
Welcome back to another episode. With us today is an author consultant of Performance Culture Expert. He is Dr. James Chitwood, talking about leadership and what we need to do to kind of get ourselves to the next level. Dr. James, so excited to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. How about yourself, Chris?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on to our show. We always like to ask our entrepreneurs, tell us more about your entrepreneurial journey. What were you doing before, and how has that kind of prepared you for what you're doing today?
Yeah, it's funny, Chris. If I look back on it, when I was a little kid, I was very entrepreneurial. I would buy candy on the way to school and sell it for 5 times the amount. I made these stupid little planes and I'd sell them. But then somewhere along the way that got in line, just followed the path. And I joined the Army out of high school and I did that. So I had a very challenging childhood. There were some entrepreneurial aspects to my childhood. We can't talk about those here. Then I just joined the Army. I went to college, just one job after the next. Just kept chasing the chain, kept going up the chain of command, kept climbing the ladder, and got in the startup space and was helping that. And I like to say I'm an ops expert with the DNA of a salesperson. So in the last decade of my life, I was in the startup space, helping new startups open up new divisions and new units, departments. I kept doing what my wife so perfectly coined as I was operationalizing myself out of a job over and over again. Because once you build a good operation, if you built it right, you don't need the brain that built it anymore. So you can hire somebody at 40% the price point and they can run it because a good option run. So I kept doing it. And then the last one, it took 9 months. And my wife's like, okay, Jim, I've been telling you to go consult for years. What are you going to do? If this is your journey and you want to just keep operationalizing yourself out of a job, go for it. Because I love you and I got you. But is that really what you want to do? So I had to do some soul searching. And the problem with consulting was I had to have an original thought, right? I had to have something new to create. I have a doctorate in organizational leadership. I had to use particular tools to study performance, to study satisfaction. I could have used those and gone to the marketplace and just been measuring job satisfaction and that kind of stuff as a consultant, but it wasn't original for me. And it just didn't tap my heart. And then I realized along the way that I had my own model that I had created for performance that I had been implementing over and over again without even thinking about it. So when she's like, what are you going to do? Why don't you go consult? I'm like, okay, well, what's my original thought? And then I had the aha moment. And I was able to see many pieces along my path all crystallize. And then that's when I decided to write my book. That's what brought me here. My objective is my book, Leadership is Not Enough, subtitle, An Operator's Guide to a Performance Culture, Operator's Manual. And it really is that. It's an ops manual. You can read it. There are pages of do's and don'ts. It's literally an ops manual. And my sister was reading my book and she's a consultant in Southern Cal doing project land development. And said, Jim, what did you keep out of your book for your consulting business? I said, nothing, because I want to give to the world. And I believe that when we give, we get. I believe that when we put it out there, stuff comes back. And I really believe in that energy. So my thought was, I want to give to the world and see what comes. And my beginning of my professional entrepreneurial journey was one where I'm literally giving to the world and just trying to create an original thought out there.
That is beautiful. I love the experience that you have and the journey that you went on, always kind of having this entrepreneurial spirit at heart, finding ways to provide value in exchange for other value was kind of the business model that you ran with. Over the last 22 years being in business, I'm sure you've seen changes in the way organizations are run, the way that employees are motivated, the way that the leaders are kind of conducting business. What have been the biggest changes that you've seen over the last 22 years here? And what is your approach to kind of taking on today's workforce with today's leadership in 2024 and beyond?
You mind if I change that question just a tad and take it back
Please do.
years?
Please do.
It takes back 80 years. Because I really believe this is the fundamental to your question. If we look at how organizations viewed employees, we have seen a shift from employees as company assets to employees as company liabilities. We have seen this radical shift. And a long time ago, pensions were the norm, right? We hired people, we kept them for life. We understood that our business is built on the backs of our people. And two things happened kind of simultaneously over a couple decades, from a late 60s to early 80s. So the 60s to 80s timeframe, we really saw the offshoring of labor, and it happened fast. We saw employees became liabilities, find our cheapest liability. Why? Because that's what you do with liabilities. You minimize your liabilities, you find the cheapest way to take care of it, right? That's a simple balance statement action. And so over these decades, we saw labor getting continually pushed into a liability and offshored. And we, as a nation, have realized it's actually not very good for us. And we're bringing that back. We've learned the errors or ways there. And we're bringing it back. We still have that fundamental issue. Where do you put your employees? That's one of my questions I ask leaders is, where is your employee population? Are they assets or liabilities? Because we treat assets differently than we treat liabilities, right? So along the way, we had two things happening. One of them was the offshoring of labor and the treating of labor as a liability. The other is CEO compensation and the treating of CEOs like gods. So if we look at CEO to employee, and you can look at lowest paid employee, median employee, average salary, whatever you look at, if you go to 1940 and you look at that differential, it's like 40 to 1. Then it goes to 50 to 1. Then it goes to 60 to 1 each decade, right? And then between 60 to early 80s, it starts to skyrocket until now we've got a place where CEOs are making 10,000 times to 1, right? 1,000 times to 1. So we've gotten to the place where we're treating our leadership like the only important asset of the company, and everybody else is a liability. And that is just a fundamental flaw. So that's what's driven all of our culture challenges to date. People aren't machines. You can't pull out one machine, stick in a new machine, and have zero effect on your productivity. You take out one human and stick in another human, you have an effect. Not only because the new asset isn't as trained, they don't know, but to everybody else. So all of those ripple effects and all those ramifications, they don't go into anybody's balance sheets. I was talking to a president of a company a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Jim, my board is really pushing back on me on compensation. And so we started to discuss the cost of turnover. And if you look at the cost of turnover, it's a lot cheaper to keep a person, right? Like 40% on the low end. So whatever that salary is, 40% of it, you just lost it. And nobody's putting that in their balance sheet. Start putting that expense in your balance sheet and you will really quickly make different decisions. And that's kind of that key point why I drive that. And you had that conversation with her was, all you got to do is show the expense that you're losing. And when you need to extrapolate it, you need to talk about productivity, you talk about time wasted for other people. Now, all these other variables come into play. But the key is, once you add turnover costs to your balance sheet, you quickly start realizing that you are far better off retaining and developing your employees than burning them out and grabbing someone else.
I appreciate you taking that through, because honestly, everything you said is 100% true. No one else has said it quite like you. It's incredible that people don't see it in the same way, where you go back 80 years and you look at the changes of labor where pensions were a norm. That was in government jobs, had to do that to keep up. And now the government jobs are the only ones that offer similar type benefits. Seeing employees as assets versus liabilities, this is the right approach that people should be taking towards building a better business. We've seen the CEO rate go from 10, 30 times into the 500 to 1,000 plus, like you mentioned. That is absolutely ridiculous. When you see that change between the gross profit and everything else, you have to wonder, do we mean anything anymore as workers? Do we mean anything, or are we just here just to get by? So I can understand the frustrations of the workforce where they feel like the CEOs and leadership are just absolutely disconnected. They have this perception that we're buying $5 coffees every day, which is not true. That may be true for them, but I just think they're so out of touch. So to have someone like you hitting the points home with actual facts and evidence is so great to hear. You can keep going for as long as you want about that. Please go.
Yeah, it's really an interesting dichotomy, because the argument is always CEOs are compensated on stock price, and so it's really right. They're compensated on the health of the company. Well, stock price has nothing to do with the health of your company. Newsflash to anybody who's not aware, any good economist will tell you the stock market and the economy have nothing to do with each other. They are not connected. The stock price of a company and that company's health have nothing to do with each other. One is purely perception and the other is hard facts, right? I mean, look at GameStop. That's a really great example of what can happen when hype follows. And it's so interesting. I was being interviewed by somebody and she said, yeah, Jim, my basic point is leadership doesn't matter. It's all about your people. It's about your operation. You build it right. You can plug and play your leaders all day long. You create the right system. It'll run forever. And she said, yeah, but leadership does matter. Watch what happens when a CEO has an affair in their private life and all of a sudden stock price goes down. I said, do you hear what just happened? Something completely unrelated to the company affected its stock price. That has nothing to do with the health of that company. It's because that man couldn't keep it in, right? In his pants. That's not the health of your company, right? So we, as consumers of stocks, we as a capitalistic society need to recognize that if we go back, I'm a fan of Adam Smith, I'm a fan of the Wealth of Nations. If you read Wealth of Nations, I take a different view than everybody. And then most people see it as the ultimate message of that is the free market economy and hands-off laissez-faire environment. It's all about that free market. And you've got to be focused on your inputs, not your outcomes, in order to make any change. And what your inputs are, if you go to it, he talks about the voluntary participation of labor. We recognize that employees are assets. And when they voluntarily participate, then they have a vested interest with you in the health of your company to drive a greater growth. And that's where the economic engine is built on. It's built upon those people and that voluntary participation. So, and it's that massive disconnect that we as consumers, and I mean all of us as consumers in a capitalistic society, we're consuming stock based off of price, not off the health of the company. I believe in the investors who are investing in companies, right, for the long term. We can liken this to energy policy, believe it or not. I have a very smart sister who worked in alternative energy for a large auto manufacturer. And I was talking about the fact that we can't get alternative energy plans to go anywhere in this country. And she goes, Jim, we have 4-year plans in this country because that's as long as someone's in office. And so we work with countries that have 1,000-year energy plans. They're making decisions for the next 1,000 years. Could you imagine America making a 100-year energy plan? No, you can't. But that's the disconnect, right? Everything in our country is so short-term focused. I was laughing at myself. So I have a doctorate in organizational leadership after 3 BA degrees. And after my MBA, I'm really good at quantifying things. And I was laughing because if you listen to a trader call, you don't hear any trader asking, how are your people living your mission and vision and values and making society better? And also, you don't hear any of that, right? What do you hear? How are you going to cut expenses in order to hit your quarterly numbers? Well, the fastest way to cut expenses is to cut people. Once you cut people, you got a ripple effect, and that is felt throughout the entire organization. And your costs just went up because you have to replace all those people, and your productivity just went down. And that's that other piece. When you look at turnover, you can't just look at your cost. You also have to look at your hit on your revenue, because it doesn't matter if they're not even a revenue generator. Every person is involved in the revenue generation of your company, even if their accounting code classification doesn't place them in the sales department line or the rev line. So when you get rid of people in all your other departments, that has an effect on sales. It has an effect on your revenue. And you need to calculate it properly to fully understand what that turnover is about to do.
Absolutely. One thing you mentioned about the free market being the outcome, I love the idea and the principle of capitalism and what that system can produce and the benefits of it. Unfortunately, I feel like it's been so long where corporations and the big players have had this upper hand. They've amassed this wealth that no longer is it a fair playing field, and it's not even close anymore. They now have the resources and manpower available to where they could, if they wanted to, pay their employees a bit more to stifle out mom and pop or smaller competition. They have the legislative power now to influence politics and laws that would benefit them. I love the idea of a free market and capitalism as a whole, but unfortunately the system's kind of been lopsided for a little too long, where it's just not as balanced as it was. I do feel like all of your ideas and your viewpoints should be what the standard is for a lot of people. And unfortunately, now we're seeing companies remove features and services and they increase the prices. They're doing the exact opposite. I think people are almost fed up. They're to a breaking point. I think recently, something you mentioned with GameStop is that sometimes the price doesn't always reflect what the company may be valued at, what their true rating might be. Is it more on a belief? Is it sentiment? Is it where the market is at? So there's all these different factors into play. But going into the free market, into GameStop, into the recent murder of the United Healthcare CEO, a lot more information is coming out to understand what's going on and what's really going on here. But I don't think there was a lot of empathy for his death. I don't know what to think of that.
Yeah, I have a college kid, again, well, you and I were talking earlier, he's a brilliant young man and is pursuing a dual degree in math and economics. And anyways, he's a college student, right? So he's part of that whole cultural norm. And this subject come up and he said, listen, Dad, first off, nobody should be deserved to be murdered. Number two, United has the highest rate of claim denial. How can you be a good man and lead a company with the highest rate of denial claim, right? And I'm really concerned that if we don't do something as a country, our capitalistic model is completely at risk. And that is my greatest concern, is that capitalism is at risk right now. And unfortunately, if we don't make little changes really quickly along the way to kind of change some things, the only way to change most things is through pretty severe means. And that's very scary. So I would really like to see us as people, as intellectuals, rise up, realize, and make some changes now, because history doesn't tell a pretty tale when you don't listen to the people. And that's basically what we're at right now. And when the people are saying, yeah, but was he like, okay, he didn't deserve to be murdered.
I think it's an interesting viewpoint. And I think the sentiment is kind of shared across the entire population. And many of them are now realizing, I think they almost enjoyed or had some satisfaction in knowing that the CEOs are a little bit too scared. They're scared. They're calling for more security services. And the CEO's first reactions was to remove the names and profile pictures on their about sections on their company pages. And maybe we should do things to make our employees happier, to make our customers happier. I mean, how scary does it have to be for McDonald's to say we're going to bring back the snack wrap? They were so adamant against that. Look at what changes are beginning to take place. And I agree, if we don't make those changes now, the entire system will be at risk.
Yeah, we lost the way to look at how we've lost our way is initially it was all stakeholder equity. And then the Jack Welch era, it became shareholder equity. And I'm sorry, but shareholder equity has nothing to do with the health of the company. They're not stakeholders. Shareholders are not stakeholders because they're not in for the long haul. You're just playing in a game. You're not building the field. So I believe until we change that in our MBA, it's about stakeholder equity, not shareholder equity, that we're going to have this challenge. There's just so many fundamental things that we need to focus on. And you're absolutely right. How about instead of getting rid of the about page, think about how do we increase the value for all stakeholders? And that includes your customers.
Yes, absolutely. It's unfortunate to see that we've gotten to a point where business itself is so consolidated that they have the nerve to do things like that. And basically, you're no longer really a customer. We don't have to do what you want or need. This is about us prepackaging something that's beneficial for us. And you have no other choice. You have to take it. And that's not true capitalism. If we had more competition available, this would look much different today, as kind of the side effects have kind of come through here. It's unfortunate, but I agree, something needs to be done. I almost feel like we should publish this episode a lot sooner, because the important topics that you mentioned here, it's a breaking point. And I think the sooner the better this message needs to get out there. What else out there is kind of the norm or the perception within business or leadership that you have a different perspective on, that you feel should be changing the world here?
Well, it's interesting. A friend of mine just read my book and he said, when you write your next one, please do it right away. Can you write it on the remote culture, the people working from home, because organizations still haven't figured it out and they don't know how. And so they're all saying, just get back into work. There's no strong empirical evidence to say organizations are more productive. There's some anecdotals, but there's just no strong empirical data to say that you're going to make your more productive workforce, right? It's just not, right? And I've been working from this room right here since 2018. So when the world shut down, the only thing that changed for me, aside from the deaths, which were absolutely terrible, I couldn't go anywhere. My house is full of people. Other than that, I was right here. I was working for a remote organization and we were a startup, and I was the first remote employee because I was the ops guy who was designed to build out an operation. And so I hired a bunch of remote people and we built a great culture because I had to just rethink the methods of engagement. That's really what it is. I believe that we need to get away from this. I have to tap someone on the shoulder to know that they're actually working. I need to measure keystrokes. I've always been that outcomes watcher, not a productivity watcher, right? And a lot of your CEOs come out of finance, right? So they only know how to count. And if you can't see them, you can't measure, they're not working. Well, maybe they are. So I've always been that. I can tell you, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of executives saying, dude, I don't care if my team works 2 hours a day. If they outperform your team, Great. Now, granted, maybe I've got productivity goal issues and I need to grade it, but if they're hitting it, they're hitting it. And that's really that simple. And so same thing, like the whole concept, it's all about methods of engagement as it relates to remote workforces. And you and I have had a fantastic dialogue before this. I personally feel like we made some great connections at a personal level through a screen. It can be done if you just read the methods of engagement and you rethink what a company meeting should be and how to make that work. So my model is built off of 4 elements. Those elements are training, recognition, accountability, and communication. They're the basics of a company. Well, training is the first thing to get cut from most companies, so I won't go down that diatribe. But one of the things that I talk about in my book is what I call the 50-50 meeting. And what a 50-50 meeting is, I got this from my uncle, Roy Chitwood, who's now passed, is every meeting needs to be half the math, half quantitative, half qualitative. You got to look at the numbers because your organization's either growing or it's dying. The math is really simple. Next year, it's going to be more expensive to do what you do. So if your revenue isn't exceeding the growth, then you're going to be losing money. And everybody needs to know this, right? So you need to be looking at this. You also need to be talking about the people. You need to have qualitative conversations. You need to make connections. You need to figure out how to do that. Now, that qualitative part could be training. It could be, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Tell me about your family. Hey, that's a super cool guitar in your background, right? Like getting to know people. Unfortunately, most people don't structure their meetings with anything more than here's the hard data facts, here's the quantitative, there you go do it. So when they're in a room, it's a little easier because then the meeting ends and they can kind of manage and feel. But when people are just sitting there on their screen and they hit you got no clue what the heck they're doing. We're a remote team right now for a client, and we've got a great culture. And it's because you got to take the time to do it. It just takes the effort, and it takes rethinking what the methods of engagement are. Once you do that, you can build the missing piece of most organizations' Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is the social bonding level, which is level 3, 2, depending on who's written it. But basically, the social bonding is the most important element before you can get up into some of these altruistic goals that everybody wants to drive to. And so most organizations don't have a clue how to build social bonding, right? They just don't know how to do it. And then if they think they do, then they go fire people and have no idea why everybody else isn't producing. Like they don't really get what social bonding is. So I hope that's a good answer to your question, that I really think we need, where we are now, our current issue is we need to rethink what the remote workforce is. We need to stop trying to get everybody back in the office. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certain jobs that do require it. They just do. Most don't. And there are a lot don't, right? And if you rethink your methods of engagement, you can build an extremely strong culture in a remote environment.
Yes, absolutely. And because you've worked with so many companies and teams and have this perception here, what do you think now is motivating employees to want to go to a company, to stick with a company? Is it the work-life balance? Is it the compensation? Is it the connections that they get? Is it the experience? What do you think CEOs and leadership should be focusing on to attract and retain talent?
What's fascinating is the shifts. We were talking about the free market economy, and one of the things that I'm very interested to see is this next generation of consumers are willing to spend 30% more of a product if they know that the company has good values and they know that they have a good environmental impact. The next level of consumer is willing to spend that. My children are willing to spend more on a product that they know goes to a company that cares about the stakeholders. And so it relates also into the workforce, because everybody talks about the next gen is not interested in climbing the ladder the same way. They're just not, right? And they're looking for purpose and meaning and values in their workplace, but they also want to know that that company cares. So a lot of that disengagement is happening, not because people are dissatisfied with their jobs, they're fine with their jobs, but the overall environment is one where you don't have that stakeholder philosophy. It's not the cultural norm to worry about. And my family are members of my stakeholders as an employee. And that's like when I talk stakeholders, I'm talking about the ripple effect outside of the employees, the whole, and the consumers and their like that's your stakeholder population set. And so when companies are focused on that greater level, that's what the modern consumers are looking for. That's what the new employees are looking for. They're willing to spend more if they know the company cares.
That is so important. Jim, we appreciate you coming on and sharing everything with us. We always like to share where people can get connected with you and find out more about you online.
Awesome. So I'm on LinkedIn, Dr. James. You can look for my book at leadership.com. That'll redirect you to a personal site, but it'll take you right to it. Leadershipisnotenough.com or my website, PerformanceCulture.Expert. So if you go to PerformanceCulture.Expert, that'll lead you right to me. And I'm a real big believer in paying it forward. So I will always have that great conversation up front to give you some great insight, get you going. And if you want to engage further, I'm happy to do so.
That is awesome. And we'll have the links available down in the description and the show notes so you can get connected with Dr. Chitwood here as well. Now, Jim, before we wrap up here, it seems like you've been doing a lot of great work. I love the viewpoints that you share and the values that you have. What are you most excited for getting into 2025 here? Are you kind of business as usual? Do you have new initiatives you're putting out? Anything cool or exciting that you're putting forward?
Getting on the speaking circuit more, getting out there, getting my message on a stage. That's what I'm really looking forward to is 2025 is moving more down that path. My work has been one-on-one with companies, interactions such as this. And I look forward to more opportunities to present my message to a broader audience in a live environment.
Well, it's a very important message, and I appreciate you going against the grain here, against what major news or popular belief or the misconceptions might be. So thank you for going to bat for us and everybody, for people as a whole, for we the people, the Americans, for people around the world. This is so important for us to be having these conversations right now. So hopefully we can get you some more speaking opportunities, open you up to our audience as well, and just promote and get your message out there a bit more.
Thank you. I appreciate you, Chris.
Of course, it was always a pleasure. We appreciate it. We'll have to have you on for a second episode here in the future once
Great.
things progress a little bit more, and we'll kind of see where the world is at that moment.
Awesome. Thank you. I look
Thanks
forward
so-
to it.
Of course. Thanks so much.